It was a quiet Tuesday morning in California. The sun had just started to rise, casting a golden hue over the hills surrounding Will Smith's sprawling estate. For weeks, the legendary actor and producer had been off social media, taking time to reflect, heal, and reconnect with himself after a whirlwind of personal and public events. His team had been instructed to keep his schedule light. No interviews, no press appearances, just space. Will sat alone on his back patio, sipping his coffee. He had just finished reading a chapter from Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, a book he often returned to in times of deep thought, when his assistant, Monica, came outside holding a letter. "Will, you got this by courier," she said, handing him a thick envelope with an official red seal. "It's from Burkina Faso." He furrowed his brow. "Burkina Faso?" "Yeah, the office ran it through our diplomatic vetting process. It's real." Curiosity piqued, Will placed his book down and took the letter. He studied the seal, an intricate emblem with the flag of Burkina Faso in the background, and slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The penmanship was clean, powerful, deliberate. The letter began, "Dear Mr. Will Smith, I hope this message finds you in strength, even though the world rarely allows men like you to be soft. I write to you not as a president, but as a fellow African son, raised in the shadows of strength and survival, just as you were. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and I am currently serving my people as the interim president of Burkina Faso. I know the world sees you as an actor, a star, even a controversial figure, but what I see is a man who carries more weight than he ever shows. In your eyes, I see the echo of our ancestors. In your silence, I see the struggle of black men everywhere, trying to be perfect, trying to be strong, when the world gives no room for mistakes. What happened to you? What you've been through? It speaks volumes to me, and I want to tell you, you are not alone. Ibrahim Traoré." Will blinked several times as he read the words. His hand trembled slightly. The letter continued, going on for several pages, each one more intimate, more poignant than the last. Traoré spoke of his own journey, how he was born in a small town in Burkina Faso, how his mother taught him to read under candlelight, how his father died too young, how he was trained as a soldier before becoming a voice for millions. But the letter wasn't about politics. It was about pain, resilience, and the quiet war every black man fights in silence. "You stood on a stage, under a billion eyes, and you broke," Traoré wrote. "Some people judged you, others laughed, but I wept, because I knew. I knew the pressure, the loneliness, the burden of always having to be strong, even when your soul is screaming." Will stopped reading. He wiped his eyes, but the tears kept coming. He clutched the letter to his chest and stood up, walking slowly back into his house. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he pulled out his own notebook, sat under the dim light of his private study, and began to write back. He didn't know exactly what he would say, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Los Angeles, but Will Smith hadn't slept. The letter from President Ibrahim Traoré had stirred something deep inside him, something raw and buried. For years, he had wrestled silently with expectations, fame, masculinity, pain, regret, and now, unexpectedly, a voice from West Africa had found its way into his soul. At 6:47 a.m., Will placed the final period on his response. He didn't type it. He wrote it by hand. It felt personal, sacred. He signed the bottom, then looked down at the pages, each one stained with small dots where a few quiet tears had fallen. He called Monica. "Get me the Burkina Faso embassy. I need this delivered today. No emails, no press, no cameras, just get it to him." Monica paused. "Is this political, Will?" Will looked at her. "Number, it's human. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, 4 days later." The heat in the capital was intense, but inside the modest presidential residence, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his reading room, a place where he often retreated after hours. When his security aide brought him a sealed black envelope marked "Personal Correspondence," he already knew who it was from. He dismissed everyone from the room, then gently opened the letter. "Dear President Traoré, I don't know how to start this except to say, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Not the actor, not the celebrity, but the man, the black man, the vulnerable one. Your words reach me in a way nothing else has in years. I've heard from psychologists, pastors, agents, journalists, but no one ever spoke to my soul the way you did. When I stood on that Oscar stage and lost myself, it wasn't about a moment. It was about decades. Decades of biting my tongue. Decades of holding my smile while my spirit broke behind it. Decades of being the man the world needed me to be. Funny, cool, safe, clean, while I was silently falling apart. You're the first person who didn't just forgive me. You understood me. And I want you to know that saved me. Well, by the time he reached the second page, Ibrahim Traoré felt a chill crawl up his spine. Will had gone on to speak about how fame was a prison dressed as a palace, how the pressure to always represent for black people in Hollywood crushed him, how he had been privately studying African revolutionary leaders, Lumumba, Sankara, Sankofa, and recently Traoré himself. Then came the words that would soon spark a firestorm across Africa. I want to visit Burkina Faso. Not for a show, not for a camera crew. I want to walk your streets. I want to sit with your people. I want to feel what it's like to just be real again. You called me a brother. Let me come home. Traoré leaned back in his chair, stunned. For a man of Will Smith's global stature to ask, not as a star, but as a human being, to come to Burkina Faso during a time of great political change, it was no small thing. Within hours, the entire presidential advisory team had gathered to discuss the potential implications. Was this a risk, a distraction, or an opportunity? But Traoré silenced them. We invited his heart, he said. Now we must open our arms. He picked up his pen and began writing back. The news was never supposed to leak. Everything had been arranged quietly between the office of the president in Burkina Faso and Will Smith's team in the U.S. No media outlets were tipped off, no press release, not even a tweet. But on the morning of March 4th, a grainy cell phone video appeared on TikTok, showing a convoy of black SUVs moving slowly through Ouagadougou, flanked by soldiers. A caption read, "I swear that's Will Smith in the second car." By noon, Chakunch Will in Burkina was trending in 6 African countries. And it was true. Will Smith had landed in Burkina Faso at 5:38 a.m., accompanied by only 3 people: his personal security officer, a cultural liaison, and his longtime friend and cinematographer Ron. He didn't come as a star. He came quietly, dressed in a simple black t-shirt, khaki pants, and a baseball cap. No red carpet, no interviews, just heart. President Ibrahim Traoré welcomed Will privately inside the modest state residence. No official portraits were taken, no handshakes for the cameras. Just 2 men, 2 generations, 2 very different lives, bound by something unspoken. They spoke for 4 hours behind closed doors. What they discussed remains largely unknown to this day, but a senior aide who was present for a small portion of the conversation later revealed. It was like watching 2 wounded lions finally laying down in peace. According to the aide, Will Smith opened up about childhood trauma, about the pressure of being the safe black man in white Hollywood, about losing parts of himself in the roles he played, and how after the slap he felt spiritually empty. Traoré, in return, spoke of betrayal within African politics, of the sleepless nights when he feared coups from his own men, of the Western powers trying to isolate him, and of the heavy crown he never asked for, but wears for his people. Then at one point, Will reportedly said, "You're the first leader I've met who still speaks like a man, not a brand." And Traoré responded, "You're the first celebrity I've seen who still bleeds like the rest of us." The next day, the world was stunned when Will Smith appeared, walking through the streets of Ouagadougou without security. Children ran after him. Elders nodded respectfully. Street vendors offered him roasted maize, which he happily accepted. He sat with local students at the University of Ouagadougou and spoke, off-camera, about resilience, identity, and what it means to carry 2 worlds in one heart. People who met him described him as soft-spoken, present, and deeply emotional. Several mentioned that he cried when a young Burkina Faso girl told him, "I never thought someone from America could feel the same pain as us. Hollywood reacts. Back in Los Angeles, the news caught the industry completely off guard. Producers called his manager asking why he was in West Africa. Netflix issued a statement saying they support Will's personal journey and confirmed a pending documentary deal was put on hold at Will's own request. But the public response was different. Millions across the African diaspora began resharing clips, calling the visit historic, humbling, and a homecoming. In Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa, people began tweeting, "Will Smith didn't just go to Africa, he returned to himself." On the third day of the visit, Ibrahim Traoré escorted Will to a quiet village outside Bobo-Dioulasso. There, in a small ceremonial gathering, the village elder presented Will Smith with a traditional Burkinabe warrior robe and named him Sankara Nyanenga, son of Sankara in the spirit of the warrior queen. Will wept. He didn't speak. He just pressed his hand to his heart and nodded, overwhelmed. In the quiet of that moment, there were no cameras, no fame, just healing. It had been 10 days since Will Smith first arrived in Burkina Faso. The visit was supposed to be private, unannounced, and off the grid. But what began as a personal journey quietly evolved into a spiritual awakening that neither he nor President Ibrahim Traoré could have predicted. By the 9th day, Will had visited 5 villages, met with displaced families affected by terrorism in the north, and spent 2 full nights in a rural community without electricity or running water, sleeping on a woven mat under the stars. Everywhere he went, people greeted him not as a Hollywood icon, but as Brother Will. He said very little publicly. He turned down every international press request. His phone was mostly off. But on the 10th day, President Traoré suggested something different. "Speak," Traoré told him. "Not to the media. Speak to the world. From here." In a small open-air courtyard in Ouagadougou, surrounded by local drummers, students, elders, and farmers, a simple chair was placed beneath a neem tree. There was no script, no teleprompter, just one camera. Will sat down, dressed in the traditional warrior robe he had been gifted, brown and gold, symbolizing strength and humility. He took a deep breath and began to speak. The video letter. "To everyone watching this, I don't know what you were expecting. Maybe a celebrity moment, maybe an apology tour. But this isn't about any of that. This is about coming home. I came to Burkina Faso because a man wrote me a letter. Not as a politician, but as a brother. That letter saved me. For years I wore masks, the Fresh Prince, the action hero, the perfect man. I smiled when I was broken. I laughed when I was dying inside. And then one day, I cracked in front of the world. I was ashamed. I was angry. But more than anything, I was alone. Until this country reminded me, I am not alone. Burkina Faso showed me that I don't have to be a brand. I can just be Will. I saw children with nothing, still smiling. I saw men who had lost everything, still protecting their neighbors. I saw women leading communities in the face of war. And I remembered what my grandmother used to say, "Baby, your soul didn't come from Hollywood. It came from somewhere deeper." She was right. This is my letter back to the world. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. Thank you, Burkina Faso. Thank you, President Traoré. And to every black boy out there who thinks he has to be strong all the time, it's okay to sit down. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to come home. Will stood slowly, bowed slightly, and walked off camera. Within 24 hours, the video had over 120 million views across platforms. It was reposted by African leaders, American civil rights activists, and even UN officials. The African Union called it one of the most powerful human reflections of the decade. Across social media, people cried, shared their own stories, and thanked Will for being vulnerable. In Paris, a Burkinabe immigrant wrote, "I left my village 10 years ago. Today I cried because a man I watched on TV found healing in the land I once called home." In the US, students at Howard University organized a campus screening and followed it with a discussion on mental health, identity, and diaspora healing. Even in Hollywood, where silence is often the safest currency, several black actors spoke out in support. Denzel Washington, in a rare tweet, wrote, "Courage isn't in the roles we play, it's in the truths we tell. Respect to Will." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, President Traoré released a quiet statement through his press office. He did not come to us as a king. He came as a man searching for meaning, and he found it in the soil of his ancestors. May his journey inspire millions more to look inward before looking outward. 3 days after Will Smith's emotional video from Burkina Faso shook the world, his phone rang while he was still in West Africa. It was a South African number, unknown. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something told him to answer. "Hello?" he said cautiously. A warm, calm voice responded. "Brother Will, this is Ndaba Mandela. I'm Nelson Mandela's grandson. I saw your video, and I just want to talk to you, man to man." Will paused. His throat tightened. Ndaba wasn't just Mandela's grandson. He was one of the few remaining bridges between Africa's historic past and its hopeful future. A global speaker, activist, and youth leader, Ndaba had spent his life carrying his grandfather's legacy while trying to carve out his own identity in a world that still worshiped names more than character. The call lasted 42 minutes. The conversation Ndaba spoke first. "What you did, Will, was bigger than a comeback. It was a call for healing, for the diaspora, for us, for every black man who has ever broken under the weight of being too strong for too long." Will didn't respond right away. He just listened. Then quietly he spoke. "I thought I was just coming here to escape, bro. I didn't know. I was coming home to resurrect something." They talked about legacy, about fathers, about pain, about public expectations. Will told Ndaba that he often felt like he'd spent 30 years trying to be perfectly digestible to the white world, while slowly becoming disconnected from his roots. Ndaba responded, "Perfection is a lie. You want real strength? It's in confession, it's in repair. And you're doing that." He then made an unexpected offer. "Come to Kunu," Ndaba said. "That's where my grandfather, Nelson Mandela, was born and buried. It's sacred ground, quiet, humble. He always said it was the only place where he felt like a human being, not a symbol. We'll sit at his gravesite. No media, no interviews. Just us, the land, and silence." Will was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, "Yes." President Traoré's reaction. When Will told President Traoré about the call, Traoré smiled, then placed a hand on Will's shoulder. "The ancestors are guiding you now. You are no longer on a journey of redemption. You are on a journey of remembrance." He gifted Will a leather-bound journal with a Sankofa bird carved on the cover. Sankofa, an Akan symbol meaning "go back and fetch it," was a West African reminder that sometimes, to move forward, we must return to what we left behind. Traoré said, "Write your truths in here, and one day share it with your sons, not as a legacy of pain, but of healing." Will nodded. No words came, only gratitude. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., news of Will's extended stay in Africa had led to a massive shift in how the world viewed him. A-list celebrities began calling his team, asking if they could visit Burkina Faso, too. Not as a trend, but out of a growing curiosity about the truth of the continent's spirit. Netflix resumed talks for a potential documentary, but this time Will made it clear: no scripts, no acting, just real life, real voices. One Hollywood insider revealed, "This isn't a PR move. Will doesn't care about saving his career anymore. He's doing something else, something we can't even define yet." On his last night in the country, Will sat around a fire with a small group of young Burkinabe artists and poets. One of them, a 17-year-old girl named Amira, recited a spoken-word poem in French that translated to, "You do not wear Africa like a costume. You wear it like a scar you finally stopped hiding." Will broke down. He hugged her tightly and whispered, "You just gave me the last piece I needed." The next morning, he boarded a quiet flight to South Africa. In his hand, the journal from Traoré. In his chest, a heart no longer broken, but beginning to beat whole again. In his soul, the voices of a continent and the memory of a letter that started it all. The wind in Kunu, South Africa, moved slowly, almost as if it were holding its breath. It was early morning when Will Smith arrived, accompanied only by Ndaba Mandela and a single security guard who remained respectfully at a distance. There were no journalists, no fans, not even staff. Just the two men and the land. Before them stood the quiet, unassuming grave of Nelson Mandela, marked simply but firmly in the red soil of his ancestral home. Will removed his shoes, not out of ceremony, but reverence. For 45 minutes, neither Will nor Ndaba spoke. They sat cross-legged beside the grave, listening to the rustling of the leaves, the distant hum of cattle, and the haunting stillness that only legacy can bring. Will's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his backpack and pulled out the journal President Traoré had given him in Burkina Faso. He flipped through its pages, now full of ink, his truths, his confessions, his brokenness, and his healing. Stopped on the last page. A single sentence. "This is the man I was always meant to become." He closed the journal, set it down next to Mandela's grave, and whispered, "Thank you for being the light before I even knew I was in darkness." Ndaba placed a hand on his shoulder. They both wept. As they walked away from the site, barefoot and tear-streaked, Ndaba asked Will, "What now?" Will thought for a long time, then said, "Now I teach my sons the truth I never knew. Now I stop acting and start living. Now I carry Africa not as a destination, but as my origin." Ndaba smiled. "That's what my grandfather always wanted, for us to remember who we are." 2 weeks later, back in Los Angeles, Will Smith uploaded a short, quiet video, just 58 seconds long. No music, no cuts, just him. Standing in front of a black background, no lights, no glamour. He said, "I went to Africa looking for peace. I found it in Burkina Faso, in a letter from a brother I never met. I found it at Mandela's grave in the silence of truth. And I realized, I've spent most of my life being seen. Now I just want to be known. By myself, by my people, by my sons. We're not lost. We're just on our way home." Then the screen faded to black. Months later, in classrooms across the African continent, students studied the unlikely friendship between Ibrahim Traoré and Will Smith as part of a lesson on diaspora identity. In Burkina Faso, a new art center was founded, the Home Project, inspired by Will's visit, aimed at healing trauma through storytelling and culture. Will never spoke again in detail about the Oscars, the slap, or the fallout, because it was no longer his ending, it was his beginning.